Please, you're a mother like me. Would you be happy if I were doing this to your child? Put yourself in my shoes and help me, please. Ugo's mother's expression hardened even more. I won't take this nonsense from you, she snapped. Leave my house this minute, or I will shout and accuse you of trying to kill me. With that, she turned her back on Oluchi, leaving her with no choice but to leave. In a remote village in the eastern part of Nigeria, there lived a beautiful young girl named Nkechi. She was the only child of her parents and was in her final year in the secondary school. Nkechi was supposed to have finished secondary school, but something happened that delayed her progress. Her mother, who had been struggling to make ends meet after the death of Nkechi's father, could not afford to pay for her final examination. As a result, Nkechi had to repeat her last class. Nkechi's father had passed away when she was still a little girl. She left behind a piece of land, which became the only means of livelihood for Nkechi's mother. Every season, her mother would plant crops on this land, tend to them with great care, and harvest them when they were ready. She would then take some of the produce to the village market to sell, using the money she earned to provide for Nkechi and herself. Despite the hardships they faced, Nkechi's mother was a strong woman, and she did everything she could to ensure her daughter had a better life. Nkechi was a bright and hardworking girl, even though life had thrown many challenges her way. She never allowed them to distract her from her studies. She knew that education was the key to a brighter future, and she was determined to succeed. After school, Nkechi would often help her mother on the farm or accompany her to the market. The two of them worked together, sharing the burden of their struggles. In the same village, Nkechi had only one close friend, a girl named Ugo. They were always seen together, whether at school, on their way to the market, or playing in the fields. Ugo was Nkechi's confidence, and they shared everything with each other. However, there was a problem that lingered between them, though it was not of their making. Ugo's mother was a woman filled with envy and jealousy. She often compared her daughter to Nkechi and felt that Nkechi was better than Ugo in many ways. This thought troubled her deeply, even though she never showed it openly. Whenever she saw Nkechi, she would smile and greet her warmly, but behind Nkechi's back, her heart was filled with bitterness. Ugo knew about her mother's feelings, but she felt helpless and didn't know how to change them. One day, Nkechi woke up later than usual. She rushed to get ready for school, knowing that she was already behind schedule. Normally, she would meet up with Ugo so they could walk to school together. But today, there was no time. Nkechi assumed that Ugo had already gone ahead. She hurried off to school without stopping by Ugo's house. When Nkechi arrived at school, she was surprised to find that Ugo was not there. She looked around the classroom and the schoolyard, but there was no sign of her friend. Nkechi was a bit worried, but she told herself that Ugo must have had a good reason for missing school. Maybe she wasn't feeling well. After school that day, as Nkechi was walking home, she saw Ugo's mother standing by the side of the road, holding a live chicken. Nkechi greeted her politely, as she always did. "Good afternoon, Mama. How are you doing today? Hope you are okay," Nkechi said with a friendly smile. "I'm okay, my daughter," Ugo's mother replied, returning the smile. "I see you are coming back from school. How was school today?" "School was fine, Mama," Nkechi answered. "But by the way, Mama, what about Ugo? I didn't see her in school today. Is she okay?" "She's fine, just a little malaria, but nothing to worry about. I've already given her some medicines," Ugo's mother replied. "Okay, Mama, please greet her for me and tell her that I will come see her later in the evening," Nkechi said as she prepared to continue on her way home. "Thank you, my daughter. Ugo's mother said. She watched Nkechi as she walked away. And as she did, a dark thought began to form in her mind. The seed of envy that had been long planted in her heart suddenly sprouted into an idea. A plan that would put an end to the comparison she hated so much. Nkechi, Ugo's mother called out, stopping her in her tracks. Yes, Mama, Nkechi responded, turning back to face her. Please, help me hold this chicken for a moment. I need to find a place to ease myself. I'm so pressed, Ugo's mother said, handing the live chicken to Nkechi. Nkechi, being the kind and helpful girl she was, took the chicken without hesitation. No problem, Mama, she said, holding the chicken carefully as she waited for Ugo's mother to return. But Ugo's mother did not go far. Instead, she quietly slipped into a nearby bush and hid herself. She watched Nkechi from her hiding place, her heart pounding with excitement at the thought of what she was about to do. As she stood there, she noticed a group of young men walking down the road, talking and laughing amongst themselves. Seizing the moment, Ugo's mother sprang out of the bush and ran towards the group, waving her arms frantically and shouting at the top of her voice. Thief! Thief! She screamed, pointing in Nkechi's direction. Nkechi, startled by the sudden commotion, turned around to see what was happening. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw Ugo's mother running towards her, shouting and pointing at her. The group of young men stopped in their tracks, confused and alarmed by the woman's cries. Nkechi stood frozen in place, the chicken still clutched in her hands, as she watched the scene unfold before her. She couldn't understand what was going on. Why was Ugo's mother shouting like that? And why was she pointing at her? It took a moment for her to realize what was happening. By then, it was too late. A group of angry youths who had heard the commotion were already running towards her. Their faces were twisted with anger, and their shouts grew louder as they closed in on Nkechi. Terrified, Nkechi dropped the chicken she was holding and ran as fast as her legs could carry her. Her heart pounded in her chest as she raced down the dirt road. But no matter how fast she ran, the angry youths were not far behind. With each step, more people joined the chase, eager to catch the so-called thief. Nkechi's breath came in rage gasps, and her legs felt like they were on fire, but she couldn't stop. She didn't know where to go or what to do. All she knew was that she had to get away. But before long, the youth caught up with her. She felt strong hands grabbed her arms and yanked her to the ground. Please, I didn't steal anything, Nkechi cried out, but her words fell on deaf ears. The youths were too angry to listen. They picked up the chicken she had dropped and wrapped it around her neck as a mark of her supposed crime. Then, the beating began. The youths slapped her, kicked her, and hit her with anything they could find. Some used palm fronds, which stung as they lashed against her skin, while others poured dirty water and mud over her. Nkechi could only cry out in pain, her voice hoarse from screaming as the assault continued. Thief! Thief! Onyoshi! Onyoshi! They shouted as they dragged her through the village, making sure everyone could see the girl they believed to be a thief. The youth did not stop until they reached the king's palace. By then, Nkechi was bruised, battered, and covered in mud. She could barely stand as they pushed her before the king, who was sitting with his family and the village elders. Ugo's mother stepped forward and prostrated herself before the king. May you live long, my king, she said, her voice full of false humility. I have come to report a case of theft committed by this thief. She continued, pointing at Nkechi with a sneer. My lord, can you believe that I left my chicken to ease myself in the bushes, only to come back and catch this girl trying to put it in her school bag? It was when I shouted thief that she quickly dropped it and ran away, Ugo's mother lied. Nkechi, despite the pain that racked her body, managed to speak. My lord, please believe me, that is not true. I was just coming back from school when she gave me the chicken to hold for her so she could ease herself. I held the chicken only for her to start shouting thief at me. The youth started chasing me and I dropped the chicken and ran out of fear. Nkechi pleaded, kneeling before the king. But the angry youths and Ugo's mother would not let her speak. They shouted over her, calling her a liar and demanding that the king not believe her story. The palace grew noisy as everyone began talking at once, each person trying to be heard. The king raised his hand to signal for silence. Enough, he commanded. The guards quickly moved to calm the crowd. The king turned to Ugo's mother and the angry youths. Calm down, he said. I will look into this matter. Leave the palace now and return in 4 days when I will give my final judgment on this case. The angry youths cheered, praising the king's wisdom before leaving the palace, still chanting a song as they went. The king then ordered his guards to lock Nkechi in the palace cell until her case could be judged. Meanwhile, back at home, Nkechi's mother was cooking food for her daughter, patiently waiting for her to return from school. She had no idea what had happened. But then, she heard the news. A neighbor came running to her, breathless and full of fear. Your daughter Nkechi had been beaten and taken to the king's palace, the neighbor cried. Nkechi's mother felt her heart stop. She didn't wait for more details. She jumped up, leaving the food cooking on the fire, and ran out of the house with just the wrapper tied around her waist. Her friend, who had been with her, followed closely behind. As they ran through the village, they passed Elder Okoro, who was a relative of Nkechi's late father and a respected elder in the palace. When he saw Nkechi's mother running, he quickly joined her, sensing that something terrible had happened. When they finally reached the palace, Nkechi's mother rushed inside and threw herself on the ground before the king, crying and pleading. My king, may you live longer than your father. Please, that girl they brought here accused of theft. She is my daughter. My king, I beg you. I never raised my daughter to be a thief. Since the day I gave birth to her, she has never stolen anything or taken what doesn't belong to her. Please, my king, don't let my daughter suffer for something she didn't do. Nkechi's mother pleaded, her voice breaking with emotion. The king looked at her with a stern expression. Woman, your daughter was brought here by angry youths who claim she was caught trying to steal a chicken that belongs to Ugo's mother. She is now in the palace cell and she will remain there until we judge the matter. If she is innocent, she will be set free. But if she is guilty, you will know the punishment for theft. The king said. At this, Nkechi's mother broke down in tears. Please, my king, don't let my daughter be stoned to death. She didn't steal the chicken. I know my daughter. She would never do such a thing, Nkechi's mother cried, her voice filled with despair. The king signaled his guards to remove Nkechi's mother from the palace, but as she was being led away, she begged to speak to her daughter one last time. The king granted her request, and a guard escorted her to the cell where Nkechi was being held. When Nkechi saw her mother, she burst into tears. Despite the pain she felt all over her body, she stood up quickly and embraced her mother, holding her tightly. Mama, I didn't steal that chicken. Ugo's mother set me up. I don't know what I did to deserve this. I have always been friendly and respectful to her and her daughter. Why did she do this to me? Nkechi cried. My daughter, I believe you. I know you could never do such a thing. I raised you well, and I didn't raise you to become a thief. It will never be well with that woman for setting you up like this, Nkechi's mother replied, her voice trembling with anger and sorrow. Their time together was short, and soon the guard led Nkechi's mother out of the palace. She walked slowly back to her house, tears streaming down her face as she wiped them away with her hands. When she arrived home, Nkechi's mother remembered the food she had been cooking before she ran out. She hurried to the fire, only to find out that the food had completely burned. The pot was black and the food inside was ruined. Nkechi's mother sat down on the floor, her heart heavy with grief. As she sat there, she began to remember a strange encounter she had with a man in the past, a man who seemed to be trying to tell her something important. It was a few years ago when Oluchi was returning from the market, her basket full of foodstuffs she had bought to prepare dinner. As she left the market, she noticed a man dressed in white, standing still and staring at her. She ignored him, thinking he was just one of the many strangers passing by. But as she continued her journey home, she couldn't help but feel his eyes following her. Every time she glanced back, there he was, not too far behind, just watching. Oluchi tried to dismiss the feeling, quickening her pace to get home faster. As she reached the entrance of her compound, she breathed a sigh of relief, thinking she had lost him. But just as she was about to step into her home, the man appeared right in front of her. Who are you? And why are you following me? Oluchi demanded, her voice a mix of fear and anger. I don't know you, and I don't want to have anything to do with you. Leave my house this minute. The man's expression remained calm as he spoke. You may not know me, but I know you, Oluchi. I have a message for you, a warning. You must be careful, for I see death looming over you and your daughter. Oluchi recoiled in shock. God forbid, she shouted, not me or my daughter. We are children of God, and no evil shall come near us. You better leave before I lose my temper. The man sighed, a hint of sadness in his eyes. You call yourself a Christian, but you do not truly know God. You do not seek him in prayer, yet you claim his protection. Be warned, Oluchi. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Oluchi standing there, shaking but determined not to let his words affect her. She dismissed it as a scam, a ploy to make her afraid and possibly extort money from her. She went inside, trying to forget the encounter. The next day, while working on her farm, the same man appeared again. I see dead still around you and your daughter, he said, his voice urgent. There is a way to avert it, but you must act quickly. Go to where you buried your daughter's placenta, bring a white female goat, and meet me there. Oluchi laughed out loud, her voice echoing across the fields. You think I'm a fool? You want to trick me into some sacrifices and then demand money? You've got the wrong person. Get out of here before I chase you away with this hoe. The man's face turned solemn. It is this same arrogance that led your husband to his grave. When warnings come, you people don't listen. But Oluchi wasn't interested in listening. Leave now or you will regret it, she threatened, waving her hoe in the air. The man gave her one last look, filled with pity, before walking away. Oluchi watched him go, her heart hardened against his words. She was sure she had done the right thing by sending him away. Now, as she sat in her hut, tears streaming down her face, she couldn't help but wonder if there had been any truth in the man's warnings. Had she been too quick to dismiss him? She shook her head, trying to push the thought away. Just then, her friend Nneka arrived, finding Oluchi in tears. Nneka sat beside her, trying to comfort her. It will be okay, Oluchi, Nneka said softly. Nkechi will be released soon. She's innocent, and the truth will come out. Oluchi looked at her friend, the memory of the strange man still fresh in her mind. Do you remember the man I told you about? The one who claimed to have a message from God. Nkechi nodded. Yes, I remember. What about him? He said he saw death around me and Nkechi. He wanted me to perform some rituals at the place where I buried Nkechi's placenta. I thought he was just trying to scam me, so I chased him away. Nneka's eyes widened in concern. But what if he was telling the truth? What if he was really sent by God, Oluchi? You know you are not the most devout Christian. You don't fast, you don't pray as you should, and you hardly ever go to the church. Oluchi bristled at the criticism. I don't need to fast or pray. My pastor does that for me. He prays and fasts for all his members. That is why I follow him. Nneka shook her head in disbelief. Oluchi, that man is not a true pastor. How can you believe in someone who charges money to pray for you? Can't you see that he's only after your money? Real pastors don't ask for payment to pray. Oluchi grew defensive. I've had enough of this, Nneka. You don't understand. I just need to get some rest and stop thinking about all this. The next day, Oluchi went back to the palace. Desperate to see her daughter, she cried and pleaded with the queen and the princesses, hoping they would have mercy on Nkechi. But the king was away on a trip and he wouldn't be back until next week. Until then, Nkechi's fate would remain uncertain. Oluchi's heart sank when she realized that Nkechi might miss her final exams if she wasn't released soon. She begged the palace guards to let her see her daughter, but they only sent her away. Oluchi returned home, her heart heavy with worry and regret. She couldn't shake off the feeling that she had made a terrible mistake by ignoring the strange man's warnings. Now, her daughter's life was at stake, and she didn't know what to do. As she lay on her bed that night, sleep eluded her. She prayed silently, asking God for forgiveness if she had been wrong. She prayed for her daughter's safety and for the truth to come out. And deep down, she hoped that somehow, some way, Nkechi would be saved. The night was long and the future uncertain, but Oluchi clung to the hope that justice would prevail and her daughter would be free once more. Oluchi's friend Nneka was on her way to the palace to check on her friend when she stumbled upon Ugo's mother. Nneka immediately recognized her as the woman who had lied against Nkechi, accusing her of stealing chicken and causing her to be locked up in the cell. Anger surged through Nneka as she thought of the injustice done to Nkechi, a young girl who was on the verge of losing her future because of a cruel lie. Without thinking twice, Nneka quickened her steps and began to chase after Ugo's mother. "You wicked woman!" Nneka shouted as she caught up with her. "How dare you lie against an innocent girl? You will pay for what you've done." Ugo's mother turned around, startled by Nneka's sudden appearance. "What do you want?" she snapped, trying to sound bold, but Nneka could see the fear in her eyes. "I want justice for Nkechi," Nneka shouted, her voice trembling with rage. "You've ruined her life with your lies, and now you think you can walk around freely?" Ugo's mother tried to brush past Nneka, but Nneka wasn't going to let her go that easily. She grabbed Ugo's mother's arms, and the two women began to struggle. Nneka was determined to make her feel the pain she had caused Nkechi and her mother. The women pushed and shoved each other, each trying to get the other to fall to the ground. Finally, Nneka managed to push Ugo's mother hard enough that she lost her balance and fell to the ground with a thud. Without wasting any time, Nneka pounced on her, pinning her down. Ugo's mother screamed and struggled, but Nneka was stronger and refused to let her go. The commotion attracted the attention of passersby, who rushed over to separate the two women. It took several people to pull Nneka off Ugo's mother, who was now lying on the ground, breathing heavily. Both women were disheveled, their clothes torn, and their faces flushed with anger. They continued to hurl insults at each other, and even after being separated, calling each other names and blaming each other for the fight. Nneka was furious, but deep down, she knew this fight wouldn't change what had happened to Nkechi. But at that moment, she didn't care. She had to let out the anger she felt for her friend and the innocent girl locked up in the palace cell. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Oluchi was in deep distress. She had been pleading with the palace guards to let her see her daughter, but they remained unmoved. Her heart was breaking as she imagined Nkechi alone in the cell, scared and helpless. "Please, I'm begging you," Oluchi pleaded with the guard, who was now trying to force her to leave the palace grounds. She had been holding onto a tree near the palace entrance, refusing to move. "Can I at least get to see my daughter? Please, I'm a mother. I could be your mother. My daughter is innocent. I'm her mother, and I know how I raised her." The palace guard looked down at Oluchi, his expression softening a bit. He could see the pain in her eyes and hear the sincerity in her voice. But he had his orders, and he knew he couldn't disobey them. "I know, but you see, this is my job," the guard said, trying to explain. "I can't put my job on the line. I don't want to lose my job, so please, just leave, okay?" Oluchi's heart sank even further as she realized that there was nothing more she could do at that moment. The guard was only doing his job, but that didn't make it any easier for her to accept. She had no choice but to leave the palace, tears streaming down her face as she walked away. As Oluchi made her way home, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She was worried, scared, and angry at once. Her thoughts were so consumed by what had happened that she hardly noticed where she was going. She found herself walking beside a lonely path, the sun setting in the distance, casting long shadows on the ground. As she walked, something caught her attention. She noticed a figure standing still in the middle of the bushes, almost hidden by the thick foliage. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but as she looked closer, she realized it was the same man who had warned her before, the man in white who she had refused to believe. Oluchi's heart skipped a beat as she recognized him. Without thinking, she rushed towards him, desperate for help. "Thank God I found you," she cried out as she reached him. "Please, I need your help. I'm sorry for not believing you earlier. I was blinded by the words of those fake pastors. Please, my daughter is in trouble. Help me." The man looked at her with a calm expression, but there was a sadness in his eyes that made Oluchi's heart ache. "I'm sorry, but there is no way that I can help you now," he said gently. "You had your chance. I personally warned you, but you refused to listen, and now you have to pay the price." As he spoke, his voice seemed to echo in the air, and before Oluchi could say another word, the man began to fade away, disappearing into thin air. Oluchi reached out, trying to grab him, but it was too late. He was gone. Suddenly, Oluchi jerked awake, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked around and realized she was still at the palace, sitting under the tree she had been holding onto earlier. It had all been a dream, a vivid and terrifying dream. But the fear and regret she felt were real, and they weighed heavily on her heart. Just then, the queen appeared, surprised to see that Oluchi was still there. She had thought Oluchi had left long ago. The queen's expression softened as she saw the tears on Oluchi's face, and she knelt beside her. "I know that this is a really hard time for you," the queen said gently, "but please, you have to leave the palace. When the king comes, I'll talk to him, and maybe he will change his mind." Oluchi looked up at the queen, her eyes filled with desperation. "Please do," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't want him to kill my daughter, please." The queen nodded, her heart going out to the grieving mother. She gestured for a guard to help Oluchi up and escort her out of the palace. As Oluchi was led away, she couldn't help but glance back at the palace, hoping against hope that the queen would keep her promise. When Oluchi finally arrived home, she was surprised to find a guest waiting for her. It was Elder Chima, one of the king's most trusted advisors. He was known to be king's favorite elder, the one whose opinions the king valued the most. Oluchi's heart lifted slightly at the sight of him, hoping that he had come with good news. Mazi Chima greeted Oluchi with a kind smile. "I know the type of emotional breakdown that you are going through now," he said in a calm voice, "but I want to tell you that I'm here to help." Oluchi felt a glimmer of hope as she listened to Mazi Chima. "You know, I'm the king's favorite," he continued. "He always listened to my opinion. I can just tell him to forgive the girl and let her go. At most, he will just flog her, and that will be all." Oluchi's heart soared with relief. "You will seriously help me to talk to the king?" she asked, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you so much. I really appreciate it." Mazi Chima smiled, but there was something unsettling about the way he looked at Oluchi. "But there is something that you will do for me," he said, his tone changing slightly. Oluchi's heart skipped a beat as she looked at the elder in confusion. "I will do anything to save my daughter," she said quickly. "What is it that you want me to do for you? Just tell me, and I will do it." Mazi Chima's smile widened, but it was no longer a kind smile. It was a wicked, twisted smile that made Oluchi's blood run cold. "All right," he said slowly. "I will help you with your daughter's case. But for that to happen, I will have to lay with you tonight." Oluchi stared at him in shock, her heart pounding in her chest as she realized the terrible price Mazi Chima was asking her to pay. Oluchi couldn't believe what she just heard. Mazichima's words echoed in her mind, causing her to take a few steps back in shock. She looked at him, trying to process what he had just said. I'm sorry. I don't think I heard what you just said. She stammered, hoping that she had misunderstood him. But Mazichima's response left no room for doubt. He walked closer to her, a slight smile on his face, and placed his hands on her shoulders. I said, I want to sleep with you tonight. Like this night, he repeated, his tone smooth and unbothered. If you agree to let me sleep with you, he continued, I will go straight to the palace and talk to the king. I will make sure that the punishment your daughter faces will be minimal. His smile widened as he saw the tears welling up in Oluchi's eyes. Oluchi shook her head, tears streaming down her face. She shrugged off his hands from her shoulders. Mazi, how can you make such a request? I'm a widow and you are telling me to sleep with you? It's not proper. I cannot do what you are asking, she pleaded, her voice trembling with desperation. But please, help me talk to the king to spare my child. She is my only child. She is the only one I've got in this world. Mazichima's expression darkened as anger flashed across his face. It's like something is wrong with you up there, he snapped, pointing to her head. So, you think you can eat your cake and have it? In fact, I will poison the king's mind concerning your daughter's case. With that, he stormed out of Oluchi's home, leaving her in a state of despair. Oluchi couldn't hold back her tears any longer. She fell to the floor, crying out in agony, wishing that the king would forgive her daughter. But deep down, she knew that without help, Nkechi's fate was sealed. Determined to try one last time, Oluchi stood up and made her way to Ugo's mother's house. When she arrived, she saw Ugo's mother sitting on a bench outside her house. Oluchi ran to her, tears streaming down her face, and fell to her knees in front of her. Please, I'm here to beg you to forgive my daughter, Oluchi sobbed. I know what she might have done to you is wrong, but please, she's a little child. Don't let them kill her for me. I know my daughter. She will never steal your fowl. Please forgive her and tell the king to have mercy on her. I'm sure he will listen to you. Adugo's mother looked down at Oluchi with cold eyes. That's never going to happen, she said flatly. Your daughter stole my fowl, and for that, she must face justice. All I want is justice, nothing else. So stop shedding these unnecessary tears. Oluchi clasped her hands together, still on her knees. Please, you're a mother like me. Would you be happy if I were doing this to your child? Put yourself in my shoes and help me, please. Ugo's mother's expression hardened even more. I won't take this nonsense from you, she snapped. Leave my house this minute, or I will shout and accuse you of trying to kill me. With that, she turned her back on Oluchi, leaving her with no choice but to leave. Defeated, Oluchi returned home, her heart heavy with despair. The weight of the past few days had taken a toll on her, and her head throbbed with pain. She lay down to take a nap, hoping to find some peace from her suffering, but even in sleep, her troubles followed her. In her dream, Oluchi saw herself stepping out of her house. As she looked around, she saw Nkechi standing in front of her. Oluchi's heart skipped a beat as she stared at her daughter, who was crying and waving goodbye. Panic surged through her, and she tried to run to Nkechi, but before she could reach her, Nkechi disappeared into thin air. Oluchi jolted awake, her heart racing and sweat dripping down her face. The dream had shaken her to the core. As she sat up, trying to calm herself, she heard a knock on the door. It was her friend, one who had come to check on her. Oluchi recounted the dream to her friend, her voice trembling with fear. She also told her about Mazichima's demand and how she refused him. Her friend listened quietly, then shook her head. Oluchi, her friend began, I know this is hard, but you need to think about your daughter. If sleeping with Mazichima is the only way to save Nkechi's life, then maybe you should consider it. Think about what will happen to Nkechi if you don't do it. Oluchi's heart ached as she considered her friend's words. She had always prided herself on her integrity, but the thought of losing Nkechi was unbearable. After much inner turmoil, Oluchi made the painful decision to give in to Mazi Chima's demand. She felt a deep sense of shame, but she told herself that she was doing it for her daughter. That night, Oluchi went to Mazi Chima's house. She felt numb as he led her inside. His grin wide with satisfaction. The deed was done, and afterward, Mazi Chima left, promising her that nothing would happen to Nkechi. But the next day, Oluchi's hopes were shattered. Mazi Chima had deceived her. He did not speak to the king as he had promised. The day of judgment arrived, and Nkechi was dragged out and placed in the middle of the palace, surrounded by the villagers who had gathered to witness her fate. Oluchi watched in horror, her heart breaking as she realized that she had been betrayed. The fear that she had tried so hard to fight off now consumed her, and she could do nothing but pray that somehow her daughter would be spared. Nkechi was dragged into the middle of the palace, her feet barely touching the ground as the palace guards pulled her along. Her clothes were dirty and torn, and her hair was a mess. She looked like she had been through a terrible storm. Her mother, Oluchi, stood a few feet away, her heart breaking as she watched her only child being treated so harshly. Oluchi wanted to rush to her daughter, to hold her, to comfort her, but the guards wouldn't let her move. They stood firm, blocking her path. Tears streamed down Oluchi's face as she cried out, her voice full of pain, but there was nothing she could do. Behind Nkechi stood Ugo's mother, the woman who had accused her of stealing the chicken. She had a stern look on her face, as if she was certain that Nkechi was guilty. She watched silently as the scene unfolded, her arms crossed over her chest. The large doors of the palace opened, and out walked the king. His steps were slow and deliberate, as if he was carrying the weight of the whole kingdom on his shoulders. Beside him was his wife, the queen, who looked at Nkechi with pity in her eyes. A council elder followed them, his face serious and full of thought. The king's daughter, who had always been kind and gentle, was not there. She had gone to the United States to study, far away from the troubles of the kingdom. She had always been the one to speak up for the less fortunate, and if she had been there, she would have begged for her father to show mercy to Nkechi. But she was not there, and the palace felt colder without her presence. The king looked down at Nkechi, who was now kneeling on the hard ground, trembling with fear. He spoke, his voice deep and commanding. "Nkechi," he said, "you said that you did not steal the chicken. But if you are innocent, why did you run when you were accused? Why didn't you stand your ground and cry out that you were wrongly accused?" Nkechi tried to speak, her voice shaky and weak. "I was scared, my king," she said, barely above a whisper. "I thought they would come after me." The king shook his head. "Fear is what makes a thief run," he said. "If you were truly innocent, you would have stayed and defended yourself. But instead, you ran, and that makes you look guilty." He turned to the guards, his face stern. "As the king of this great kingdom, I find you guilty, Nkechi," he declared. "Your punishment is 30 strokes of cane. Guards, get to work." Oluchi's heart sank. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. "My king, please," she cried out, her voice full of desperation. 30 strokes? My king, look at her. She's already weak and has not eaten in days. If you flog her like this, she will not survive. Let me take the punishment for her. Please, my king, she's my only child, I beg you." But the king was unmoved. His face grew dark with anger. "Will you shut up your mouth, woman?" he shouted. "Guards, start flogging her." The queen, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, her eyes pleading. "My king, please," she said softly, "forgive this little girl. She's just a child." But the king turned away, his face set in stone. He did not listen to the queen's pleas. The guards moved in, three of them holding thick wires instead of canes. They began to strike Nkechi, the wires cutting through the air with a terrible sound. Each blow landed on Nkechi's frail body, and she cried out in pain, her voice echoing through the palace. Nkechi tried to endure, but the pain was too much. She looked at her mother, her eyes full of tears, and waved weakly. Just as Oluchi had seen in her dream, Oluchi's heart shattered at that moment, realizing that her worst fears were coming true. And then, in the middle of her suffering, Nkechi's cries suddenly stopped. Her body went limp, and she fell silent. The guards, not realizing what had happened, continued to flog her, their faces expressionless as they were carrying out just another task. Oluchi screamed, a sound so full of pain that it seemed to shake the very walls of the palace. She broke free from the guards who had been holding her back and ran to her daughter. She dropped to the ground and took Nkechi's head in her hands, shaking her, begging her to wake up. But Nkechi was gone. Her body was still, her eyes closed, and Oluchi knew that her daughter was no longer with her. The guard stopped, finally realizing what had happened, but it was too late. Nkechi was dead. Oluchi lost control. She ran around the palace, her mind unable to grasp the reality of what had just happened. She screamed and cried, pulling at her hair, her voice filled with the deepest sorrow. The palace guards and servants watched, unsure of what to do, their faces pale with shock. The king turned and walked back into the palace, his face pale and his hands trembling. He went into his chamber, closed the door behind him, and sat down. He took off his crown and placed it on the table in front of him. His head was heavy with guilt, and he began to pace back and forth, his mind racing with thoughts of what had just occurred. The queen followed him into the chamber, tears streaming down her face. She looked at her husband, her heart full of anger and pain. "Are you happy now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Tell me, are you happy now that you have killed that innocent girl?" The king did not respond. He stood there, staring at the floor, unable to meet his wife's gaze. "I begged you," the queen continued, her voice rising with emotion. "I pleaded with you to forgive her, but you wouldn't listen. You ordered 30 strokes of the cane, and now that poor girl is dead. She died right here, in your palace, and it's your fault." The king finally looked up, his face full of regret. "My love, please forgive me," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know this would happen. I didn't know that flogging her would lead her to death. I'm so sorry." But the queen shook her head, her eyes full of tears. "This wouldn't have happened if you had just listened to me," she said, her voice full of sorrow. "How do you think our daughter will react when she hears that you killed an innocent girl? She will hate you for this." The king's face fell even further, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. "I know," he said quietly, "but please, you have to understand, I'm sorry." The queen looked at him, her face full of determination. "I cannot live with a murderer," she said firmly. "I wash my hands of this. Her blood is on your hands, and on the hands of everyone who played a role in this. I am leaving this palace." With that, the queen turned and left the chamber, her heart heavy with grief. She began to pack her belongings, ready to leave the palace that had become a house of sorrow. The king was very surprised to find out that his wife had really left him. He walked back into the palace, his mind full of confusion. He began to pace back and forth, trying to think about what had happened. After some time, feeling tired and overwhelmed, the king decided to lie down and rest. He hoped that some rest might help him make sense of everything. Meanwhile, at home, Oluchi was in great distress. She was rolling on the floor and seemed almost out of her mind with grief. She tried to untie her wrapper and run out into the street, but her friend was there to help her. Oluchi kept shouting, "Bring my daughter back! I want to see her!" Tears flowed down her face like water from a tap. Her friend was there, trying to comfort her and calm her down. Why does death have to do this to me? Oluchi cried out. First, they took my husband, leaving me a widow, and now they have taken my only child too. I am so tired. Just come and take me too. I just want to die. Her friend responded gently. Come on, Oluchi, don't say that. How can you wish for death? Nobody is going to die again. You need to try and rest. Rest? Oluchi replied with a sob. How can I rest when my only child is gone? There is no point in living this life anymore. I just want to die so I can be with my family again. Losing her only child felt like a sharp knife cutting through Oluchi's heart. She could not stop crying. She cried and cried all day until she eventually fell asleep on the floor where she had been crying. 2 weeks had passed since the incident at the palace, and the king still had not heard from his wife or his daughter. Every time he called his wife's number, it did not go through. He felt more and more worried each day. One morning, Oluchi's friend came to visit her. She had prepared some food because she knew that Oluchi might not be able to cook for herself. When Oluchi's friend entered the house, she found Oluchi covered completely with a blanket. Oluchi was shivering, even though the weather was warm. Her friend was surprised and asked, Oluchi, why are you covered with a blanket? Are you feeling alright? Oluchi did not respond. She just continued to shiver under the blanket. Her friend decided to take her outside to get some fresh air. Oluchi, tell me what is wrong. You are shivering, but the weather is hot. Your body feels cold. I think this might be a sign of sickness. We need to go to the hospital and get you checked, her friend said. Oluchi finally spoke, her voice weak. I'm not sick. I know exactly what is wrong with me. I'm pregnant, Oluchi said. Her friend looked shocked and confused for a moment. Oh no, 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 this can't be possible. You cannot be pregnant. You must have mistaken the symptoms. Don't worry, I will take you to the hospital. Meanwhile, the king was having a very difficult time. He had not spoken to his wife for weeks and did not know where she was. He tried calling her number many times, but it never went through. In his desperation, the king decided to ask one of the queen's friends, Ginika. Ginika was the only friend of the queen that the king knew. She was also a queen, ruling a neighboring village. The king invited Ginika to the palace and told her everything that had happened, including Nkechi's death. He asked Ginika if she had heard from his wife since she left the palace. But Ginika did not know where the queen was or what had happened to her. One day, Oluchi's friend came to check on her again. She knocked on the door, but there was no answer. She knocked again and again, but still no one opened up. Growing worried, she pushed the door open and went inside. What she saw made her heart stop. Oluchi was lying on the floor, not moving and not breathing. Oluchi's friend, still holding the food she had brought, was frozen in place as she entered the house and saw Oluchi lying lifeless on the body. Her mouth fell open in shock, unable to believe what she was seeing. The food slipped from her hands and fell to the ground as she hurried over to Oluchi, her heart pounding with fear. Kneeling beside Oluchi, she touched her friend's cold hand, hoping for some signs of life, but there was none. Oluchi's friend pressed her ears against Oluchi's chest, praying to hear a heartbeat, but all she heard was silence. Tears filled her eyes as the terrible truth sank in. Oluchi was gone. Her only friend in the village was dead. The tears came quickly as she clutched Oluchi's lifeless hand, her heart breaking with every passing seconds. Oluchi, no, she cried out, her voice trembling with grief. Why did you do this? Why did you leave me all alone? As she cried beside Oluchi, something caught her eyes. Just a short distance away from where Oluchi lay, she noticed a small black container. Curiosity mixed with dread as she slowly stood up and walked over to the container. Her hands trembled as she picked it up and opened it, bringing it close to her nose to smell what was inside. The sharp, bitter smell hit her immediately. It was poison. A fresh wave of horror washed over her as she realized what Oluchi had done. Her friend had taken her own life, unable to bear the pain and suffering any longer. The weight of this realization crushed her spirit, and she let out a heart-wrenching cry. Oh, Uchi, why did you do this to yourself? She wailed, her voice echoing through the empty house. I know things were hard, but you didn't have to do this. You didn't have to go this far. Why would you take your own life? Oluchi's friend could hardly believe the woman who had been her closest companion, the one who had shared her joys and sorrows, was now gone. She felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under her, leaving her lost and alone. Unable to contain her grief, she ran out of the house and onto the street, her cries filling the air as she stumbled and fell to the ground. She rolled on the dusty road, her tears mixing with the dirt as she cried out for her friend. Her eyes were red and swollen, the pain of losing Oluchi too much to bear. For a long time, Oluchi's friend sat on the ground, letting the tears flow freely. Her mind drifted back to all the happy moments they had shared together, the laughter, the conversation, the times they had supported each other through life's challenges. It was hard to believe that those moments were now just memories and that Oluchi was gone forever. Oluchi, you didn't have to go, she whispered, her voice breaking. You shouldn't have killed yourself. I understand that the pain was difficult, but why did you have to drink poison? As she sat there, mourning the loss of her dear friend, anger began to build within her. She knew this wasn't just about Oluchi's grief. There was something more, something that had pushed her over the edge. And then it came to her, Mazichima. It's not your fault, my dear friend, Oluchi's friend said softly, her tears now drying on her cheeks. Mazichima caused all this. He deceived you and got you pregnant. And I know what I must do. With that thought, she slowly rose from the ground, a new determination filling her heart. She had lost her friend, but she wouldn't let Oluchi's death be in vain. There was something she had to do, a wrong that needed to be made right. Without a second thought, she marched straight to the palace, her eyes set on one thing, justice. She ignored the calls from people who noticed her in distress, not letting anything distract her from what she had to do. When she arrived at the palace, the guards recognized her and allowed her in. Oluchi's friend walked straight up to the king, who was sitting with his elders in council. They were in the middle of a discussion, but their conversation halted as soon as they saw her. The king's eyes widened in surprise as he noticed her tear-streaked face. Why are you crying? The king asked, his voice filled with concern. Is everything alright? Nneka, Oluchi's friend, tried to wipe her tears away, but the pain in her heart was too strong to hide. My king, she began, her voice trembling. Everything is not alright. It's about my friend, the woman whose daughter was killed here at the palace. My lord, that woman is now dead, and she died because of this man here. Her finger pointed directly at Mazichima, who was sitting among the elders. A wave of shock swept through the room. The king's face turned serious as he looked between Oluchi's friend and Mazichima. What do you mean by she died because of this man? The king asked, his voice tense with confusion. Oluchi's friend took a deep breath, steadying herself to reveal the painful truth. My friend Oluchi begged this man, she said, pointing at Mazichima again, to help speak to you, my king, to save her daughter from being punished. But this man, Mazichima, said he would only help if she agreed to let him be with her. Gasps filled the room as everyone, including the king, stared at Mazichima in disbelief. The elders exchanged worried glances, murmuring amongst themselves. The king's gaze hardened as he looked at Mazichima. Mazichima, the king said sternly, is what this woman saying true? I want the truth, no lies. Mazichima stood up from his seat, his face pale, but his voice steady. My lord, what this woman is accusing me of is not true, he said, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and indignation. How could I ask her to do such a thing? My king, you have known me for many years. I would never do something like that. I can never. But Oluchi's friend was not finished. My king, I am not lying, she insisted. He also, will you shut up, stop spilling lies. Mazi Chima shouted, cutting her off. Leave this palace this minute. She goes nowhere. The king interrupted, his voice cold and sharp. His eyes locked onto Mazi Chima's, filled with suspicion and anger. Go on, my daughter, he said, turning to Oluchi's friend Nneka, encouraging her to continue. With the king's support, Nneka, Oluchi's friend, found the strength to press on, determined to expose the truth no matter the consequences. Nneka stood before the king, her voice trembling with guilt and pain. My king, she began, the part that hurts me the most is that I am the one who advised her to sleep with him. I only wanted the best for her. I didn't know he would deceive her and that it would end like this. The king's face grew dark with anger as he turned to Mazi Chima, his trusted advisor. Mazi Chima, the king said, his voice firm, can you please explain yourself? I can't believe that my right-hand advisor is committing these evil acts. Mazi Chima shifted nervously, his heart pounding in his chest. My king, the way she's saying it is not the way it actually happened. He stammered. My king, please hear me out. I can explain. I slept with her, but I... The king cut him off sharply. You slept with her? That alone is enough evil. The king said, his voice cold. You are abusing the privilege that I gave you. You are now using it to do evil. From now henceforth, I don't want to see you in my palace ever again. With those words, the king signaled to the palace guards, who immediately grabbed Mazi Chima. They dragged him out of the palace and threw him out into the street. The news of what Mazi Chima had done spread throughout the village like wildfire. Everywhere, women whispered about it, shaking their heads in disgust. As Mazi Chima walked home, humiliated and disgraced, a cold shiver ran down his spine. Suddenly, he saw something that made his heart stop. Right in front of him, Nkechi's spirit appeared. Mazi Chima screamed in terror, trying to run, but his feet were rooted to the ground. He couldn't move. Please, forgive me, Mazi Chima begged, his voice shaking with fear. I know I'm the reason why you are here. Please, I'm begging you, forgive me. I don't want to die, please. Nkechi's spirit hovered before him, his eyes cold and unforgiving. Oh, you don't want to die? She said, her voice echoing like a distant thunder. But you were the reason for my death. You even went ahead to sleep with my mother and caused her more pain after my death. Please, I'm sorry, Elder Chima pleaded, tears streaming down his face. Forgive me, I'm begging you. I don't want to die. I know I offended you, but please spare my life. Nkechi's spirit remained unmoved. Forgiveness is not for mere mortals, she said, her voice filled with a terrible power. Spirits like me do not forgive. Today you shall regret the day you were born. Nkechi's spirit raised her hand, and her voice became even colder. I curse you today, she declared. No one will ever recognize you or even know you existed. Your stomach will swell and you shall suffer great pain, but you will not die. You will continue to suffer and no one will help you. Wait, please, Elder Chima cried out in desperation. Don't do this to me, please. I'm begging you, don't do this to me. But Nkechi's spirit ignored his pleas. She vanished into the air, leaving Mazi Chima alone. Immediately, he felt a sharp, unbearable pain in his stomach. He screamed in agony as he collapsed to the ground. His stomach began to swell rapidly, growing so big that he could not move. Mazi Chima lay on the ground, writhing in pain, but no one stopped to help him. People walked by as if he didn't exist. It was as if he had become invisible, a ghost in his own village. The pain in his stomach was so intense that he thought he might die. But he didn't. The curse was working, and Mazi Chima knew that his suffering was only beginning. Ugo's mother was busy in the garden near her house, tending to her vegetables. She hummed softly to herself as she planted seeds into the soil. The day was warm, and the sun shone brightly overhead. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the garden, making her shiver. Before she could wonder what it was, a figure appeared right in front of her. It was Nkechi's spirit. In shock, Ugo's mother jumped back, her heart pounding in her chest. She stumbled and fell to the ground, her eyes wide with fear. Nkechi, she gasped, trembling. Is this you? How is that possible? I saw you dead. I witnessed when you were flogged to death. Nkechi's spirit floated closer, her voice cold and filled with anger. Look here, evil woman. Today is the day you will regret ever coming into this life. What did I do to you? Why did you lie against me? Ugo's mother shook her head, her hands shaking. Nkechi, please, I'm sorry. Forgive me, please. I did it out of jealousy and envy. You excelled greater than my daughter, Ugo, in academics, and I couldn't stand it. Nkechi's spirit glared at her. So it is your jealousy that will lead you to your death today. Ugo's mother's eyes filled with tears. Please, my daughter, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to let you die. I just wanted you to be punished badly. Please forgive me. But Nkechi's spirit remained unmoved. Woman, stop asking me for forgiveness. Forgiving is for the mere mortals, and spirits like me don't forgive. Nkechi's voice grew even colder. Do you know that you are the major reason why my mother is dead today? She came to you, pleading, begging you to tell the truth. But no, you refused. You never wanted to spare my life, but you bluntly refused because you are evil. Ugo's mother collapsed to her knees, weeping. I know I have caused you great pain and burden. Please, forgive me, my child, for the sake of your best friend, my daughter Adugo. Forgive me, she continued, her voice cracking. And again, I'm not the cause of your mother's death. She mainly died because of the pregnancy given to her by Mazi Chima. Nkechi's spirit's eyes flashed with anger. Don't you know that she slept with him because you refused to tell the truth? That you were lying against me? She had no other option. Adugo's mother sobbed, her voice barely a whisper. My daughter, I'm speechless. I don't even know what to say. But all I want is for you to spare my life. I don't want to die now. Nkechi's spirit looked at her with disdain. You really don't want to die now, but you love to lie against people and get them killed. You even watch them die. You say you don't want to die. I will make sure you don't. In a panic, Ugo's mother scrambled to her feet and tried to run away. She thought Nkechi was still a mortal, someone she could hide from, but she didn't get far. It wasn't long before Nkechi's spirit caught up with her. Nkechi's spirit loomed over her, her voice echoing with power. I curse you today. You will spend the remaining years of your life on earth as a mad woman. No one will recognize you again, and you will continue to starve and get sick, but death won't come your way. As soon as Nkechi finished speaking, Ugo's mother began to change. Her eyes glazed over and her face twisted with madness. She looked around in confusion. Then suddenly, she screamed and started running away, her mind completely lost. Nkechi's spirit watched her disappear into the distance, then looked at herself. Two down, one more to go, she whispered, and then she vanished into the air. The palace had been unusually quiet since Nkechi's tragic death. The king, though a man of great power, was deeply troubled. He missed his wife, who had refused to return home after he ordered Nkechi to be flogged, a punishment that led to her untimely death. Every day, the emptiness in the palace grew, and so did the king's guilt. One evening, as the sun set and the palace became bathed in a soft orange glow, the king decided to retire to his chambers for a bath. He wanted to relax and forget his troubles, even if just for a little while. Before heading to the bathroom, the king called one of the trusted palace maids. I want to go and shower, the king said, his voice calm but tired. By the time I come back, make sure that my room is cleaned up and neat so that I can have a good night rest. The maid nodded respectfully. All right, your highness, I'll do just that, she replied. As soon as the king left, the maid got to work, Carefully arranging the room, she made the bed, folded the clothes, and ensured that everything was in proper place. The room looked perfect when she was done, and she left quietly, certainly that the king would be pleased. The king took his time in the shower, letting the warm water wash away the day's stress. He finally emerged, feeling a bit more relaxed. But the moment he stepped back into his room, his heart sank. The room was in a complete mess. Clothes were scattered all over the floor. The bed was unmade, and the bedsheet was crumpled and thrown aside. It looked as if a storm had passed through the room. The king's relaxation vanished instantly, replaced by anger. "What is the meaning of this nonsense?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the palace. The maid, hearing his angry voice, rushed back to the room. "Your Highness, I'm here. I heard you call for me," she said. The king pointed angrily around the room. "Before I went to the bathroom to have my shower, what did I tell you to do?" The maid hesitated, confused by the king's anger. "Your Highness, you said I should clean and arrange the room so you can have a good night's rest." The king nodded. "Good. Now take a look at the room I told you to arrange. What is the meaning of this?" His voice was loud and stern. The maid turned to look around the room and gasped. But, my king, I arranged this room. I'm sure that I arranged it. I folded all the clothes and arranged them properly before I left." The king's eyes narrowed. "So what are you trying to say? Are you saying that the clothes threw themselves on the floor or something?" The maid, now trembling, shook her head. "My king, someone must have done this. I swear that I neatly arranged this room." The king sighed in frustration. "That's not possible. Nobody in the palace would dare enter my room. You are the only one with the access." The maid didn't know what to say. She stood there, feeling helpless and scared. The king shook his head. "You know what? Just arrange the room again. I'm tired. I need to rest." "It's been a very long day." The maid hurried to fix the room once more, making sure everything was in its place. The king, still grumbling under the breath, finally lay down on the bed. He placed his phone by the side and left a small lamp on, casting a soft glow around the room. He closed his eyes, trying to let sleep take over. But sleep didn't come easily. Just a few minutes after closing his eyes, the king was jolted awake by the sound of his phone ringing. He picked it up, curious to see who was calling him at that hour. But to his surprise, the caller ID was blank. No name, no number, just a mysterious call. The king hesitated, but eventually he answered the call. The moment he pressed the phone to his ear, he was met with a horrifying sound. Screams filled his ears, loud, desperate screams. Then he heard the cry of Nkechi, the exact cries she made when she was being flogged to death. The king's heart raced. His hand shook as he listened in disbelief. The call ended abruptly, and when the king looked at his phone, he was shocked to see that it had gone completely blank. Smoke began to rise from it, and in a panic, the king threw the phone away. Just then, the little lamp beside his bed flickered and went out, plunging the room into pitch darkness. The king was left alone in the blackness, his heart pounding and fear gripping him like never before. The king, already troubled by the strange events in his palace, was now truly terrified. He had never experienced anything like this in life. As soon as the room went dark and his phone mysteriously smoked, the king jumped out of the bed, his heart racing. His body started shaking uncontrollably, and sweat poured down his face. "What is happening in this palace?" the king muttered to himself, trying to calm down. First, the room was mysteriously scattered. Then, that strange phone call, and now this. Something is definitely wrong. But what could it possibly be? The king fumbled around in the darkness, trying to find his way. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. But before he could gather his thoughts, he felt something cold and strong grip his shoulder. The hand squeezed him tightly, sending a sharp pain through his shoulder. The king gasped in pain and stumbled backward, crying out, "Blood of Jesus! What is this? Who touched me?" The king shouted, jumping back onto the bed. His eyes were wide with fear, his heart pounding louder than ever. Then, out of the darkness, a voice spoke. It was a voice the king recognized, but it was different now, darker, colder, and filled with anger. "Your Highness, you do not remember me? I hope you do so, because I have a lot of things to settle with you," the voice said, followed by a chilling, wicked smile. The king's mind raced as he tried to place the voice, and then it hit him. "Wait, I think I remember that voice. You are that girl, the girl that was flogged to death, right? Look, I am so sorry. I didn't mean for you to die. I realized my mistakes. Please, it was not intentional." The king's voice shook as he spoke, desperately trying to find a way out of his nightmare. He couldn't believe what was happening. "But I thought you died. How is it possible that you are still standing in front of me? Things have been so strange around me lately." Nkechi's spirit, now fully visible in the dim light of the room, stared at the king with a cold, unforgiving gaze. Her eyes, once filled with life, were now black as night, emitting a dark smoke that filled the air around her. "There is no need to be sorry," Nkechi's spirit said, her voice calm but filled with anger. "There is no need to start pleading or asking for forgiveness, because the deed has been done, and you must pay for your actions." The king opened his mouth to speak, to try and reason with the spirit before him, but before he could utter a word, Nkechi's spirit moved swiftly. She gripped the king with both hands and pulled him closer, forcing him to look directly into her eyes. The king felt an overwhelming force holding him in place, unable to move or look away. Nkechi's eyes bore into the king's soul, her black eyes shining with a dark light. The room seemed to close in around them as the darkness grew thicker and the air filled with a sense of dread. Then, the king's heart pounded in his chest as Nkechi's cold, lifeless eyes stared deep into his soul. Her grip was strong and cold, and the dark smoke that filled the room made it hard for the king to breathe. He tried to pull away, but she held him tightly, and her strength was too much for him. "Let me go," the king cried out, his voice shaking with fear. "I beg you, spare me." But Nkechi's spirit did not move. Her face showed no pity, only a deep, unchanging determination. "You showed no mercy when you condemned me to death," she said, her voice low and full of anger. "Now you will understand the pain and suffering you caused me." Her grip on the king tightened, and he felt a sharp, cold pain spread through his body. The king was terrified. His mind raced as he searched for a way to escape this nightmare. "Please, there must be something I can do," he pleaded. "I will make things right. I'll do anything." But his words did not reach Nkechi. She only moved closer, her dark eyes never leaving his. "You cannot escape your fate," she whispered, her voice filled with sorrow and anger. "Your actions have consequences, and now you will pay the price." The king felt his strength slipping away. His vision started to blur, and everything around him became darker. In the middle of the terrifying moment, the king's mind went back to the night when Nkechi had died. He had been so afraid, so filled with anger, that he had ordered her to be punished without mercy. Now he was facing the result of his cruelty. Regret and fear filled his heart. "Help! Someone please help me!" the king called out, but his voice was weak, and it seemed like no one could hear him. The palace, once a place of comfort, now felt like it was closing in on him, as if the walls themselves were angry and wanted revenge. Suddenly, the room was filled with a bright light. The king covered his eyes, trying to see who or what was causing it. To his surprise, a priest appeared in the light, his robe shining with a holy glow. "Begone, vengeful spirit!" the priest commanded. Holding up a cross, Nkechi's spirit stepped backward. Hissing with anger, the dark smoke began to fade away, and the grip on the king's shoulder started to loosen. The king fell to the floor, gasping for breath. Thank you, he said, tears running down his face. The priest knelt beside him, praying and making the sign of the cross. You must repent, your highness, the priest said in a serious tone. Only through repentance and seeking forgiveness can you find peace. The king nodded, his heart heavy with guilt and desperation. I will, I swear it, the king promised. I will make up for all the wrongs I've done. I will help the people I have hurt. He looked up at the priest, his eyes full of a new determination to change. The priest placed a comforting hand on the king's shoulder. It will not be easy, he said, but your journey to redemption starts now. You must seek out those you have wronged and make amends. Only then can you hope to lift this curse. The king slowly stood up, still feeling the weight of his sins. He knew that the path ahead would be long and difficult, but he was determined to change. The memory of Nkechi's suffering would stay with him forever, a constant reminder of what he had done. As the first light of dawn entered the room, the king made his way to the palace chapel. He knelt before the altar, his heart full of sorrow. Forgive me, he whispered, tears falling freely. Help me find a way to make things right. Days turned into weeks, and the king began his journey of redemption. He went to the families of those he had harmed, offering to make things right and asking for their forgiveness. He used his wealth to build schools, hospitals, and shelters, determined to use his power to do good. Word of the king's change spread throughout the kingdom. People were amazed by the transformation of their ruler, who had once ruled with fear but now showed kindness and humility. Slowly, the kingdom began to heal. But no matter how much good he did, the king never forgot Nkechi. Her spirit's visit was always in his mind, reminding him of his past cruelty. He built a shrine in her memory, a place where people could come to honor her and remember the importance of mercy and justice. Years passed. The king grew older. On his deathbed, he thought about his life, knowing he had tried his best to make things right. As he took his final breath, he prayed that Nkechi had found peace and that he too would be forgiven in the life after. In the end, the king's story became a legend, a tale of redemption and the power of repentance. Though he had been haunted by the ghost of the past, he had found a way to make peace with his conscience and leave a legacy of kindness and justice. And with that, my dear friends, our story comes to a close. But remember, the magic of storytelling lives on, waiting to whisk us away on new adventures, where the wonders of imagination know no bounds. Goodbye for now, and may your dreams be filled with joy, wonder, and endless possibility. Thank you so much for watching. Please kindly comment, like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting stories.